Welcome back to the Veterans Club podcast. This is Jeffrey Rosales alongside my co-host for the day, Hiram Figueroa. This podcast is about giving you a voice and equipping you, leaders, with faith, conviction, and impact. Today, we're going to have an explosive conversation with Apollo Hernandez. Apollo is a former Recon Marine, multi-tour combat veteran, cybersecurity business leader. He's a husband, father, and a proud Texan running to bring strong leadership and real conservative values back to the Texas Senate District 5. Apollo, welcome to the Veterans Club podcast.
Yeah, howdy. Thank you for having me on here. I think it's important to actually talk to people about leadership and the things that can happen, and having veterans run for office. So definitely appreciate you guys having me on here.
Absolutely. And, it's an honor. And as we mentioned before, we need more veterans. I'm a little biased. We need more Marines in business, government, and politics, and involved in the community. Those leadership skills don't stop once you take off the uniform. So I encourage everybody that's going to be listening to today to really listen in, take notes, and figure out how you can also lead in your community. So, Paulo, I'd like to orient people, first of all, talking about that working class family growing up in Texas. Tell us where you grew up and what that was like.
Yeah, I didn't grow up wealthy. I was very fortunate in the sense that my family had a little bit of land and we farmed. So I spent time working out in the fields and getting my hands dirty. And I've done it all from picking squash to bucking bales of hay. And now that's kind of what my family does. And my father was a police officer. He's worn a badge my entire life. And he actually retired from the police department and still wears a badge today as a deputy sheriff. And I grew up in a border town, a small little border town in Del Rio, Texas, that's been in the news fairly recently because of all the immigration problems that we've had. And I will say that it's gotten a little bit better, but it's still, there's still a constant flow of people coming in. And one thing that, on the campaign trail that I'm always kind of talking about, human trafficking is the big thing. And sadly, there's more human trafficking going on today. And it's modern day slavery. That's all it is. There's more slaves today than there were in the 1860s when we fought a war to end slavery. So it's something we got to fix. The border is not completely secured. We've worked on it, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done down there. And that's where I grew up, Del Rio, Texas. Small little border town that has a bunch of issues with that. Also, both I come from kind of a family of educators. My family, my grandparents were both educators. It's just something that's been really important to me. And that's another thing that I've been kind of focused on in fixing in Texas. If we were our own country, we'd have the 8th best economy in the world. But if you look at our education ranking, we're in the bottom half of America. We're number 40, actually. And that's embarrassing. That's something that we need to fix. And I think there's just local policies that we can do that could fix that and make our education system significantly better.
Paulo, hey, I got to throw this in. I knew we got along real quick. My ex-wife is from Hondo, Texas. I've been to Del Rio. I've been.
That's there.
I know that border town and that mentality. That was like 40-something years ago when I was strongly introduced to how the mentality is, and it's very patriotic. So kudos to you. So I'll give it back to Jeffrey so we can continue.
So I like what you're talking about because it reminds me of food deserts. In this case, it's education deserts. One of the things growing up in Fresno, for us, it's we always had what we call this brain drain, right? A lot of people would leave to other cities because they would seek access to more opportunities. That could be going to school, that could be on the economic side, or just they want to go see the world and join the Marine Corps, right? Which is what I did at the age of 18. And so I think those sometimes it's great that you're focused on that. And I agree with you with border security. We definitely need to improve that a lot more coming from educator family. My sister's a teacher. My sister-in-law is also a deputy sheriff for LA. So, and also too, my family comes from, this World War II program, the Braceros program, which brought us over here to Fresno. So a lot of us did grow up working in the fields as well. But I do want to hit what values did you get from your dad and your family growing up?
Yeah, it definitely work ethic. That's the biggest thing. my family, we weren't well off, but we worked hard, and they were able to provide. My family were great providers. That's one of the biggest things. And for me, my father being a police officer, he would just have conversations with me. He would pull me aside and just be like, hey, I know you're going to make mistakes in life, but you're going to learn those on your own, and just taught me right and wrong. And I think that's a big thing. And then the grit aspect. Grit is super important. Being resilient enough to be tired and not want to work, but you got to get things done. And that translated directly into the Marine Corps to me, where, I when I enlisted, I went through, like, I think it was 3 days after graduating high school, like the next weekend I was off to boot camp. And, I'm sure everyone here, has similar stories. Like for me, that was not my plan. Like I wanted to be a Marine, but my intent was to go to college first, get a degree, go to the Marine Corps as an officer. But while I was in high school, 9/11 happened. And then my senior year of high school, we invaded Iraq. And I was, young and dumb, didn't want to miss my chance to go to war. I didn't realize the wars were going to last for forever. So I enlisted, and was able to do, what people think of when they think of the military. Like my first deployment, we fought in the Battle of Fallujah, and then I've had 3 other combat deployments while active duty, that were fairly kinetic, actually highly kinetic, especially the first 2, where we fought in big operations like the Battle of Fallujah, Operation Steel Curtain, and a bunch of other things like Western Shield and Ripper Sweep, all these engagements that, we're pulling triggers, doing what people think of when they think of the military, which, as we all know, that's kind of a small percentage of people that actually, end up fighting. And it's not, a lot of it is luck, chance, circumstance. I think anyone that joins during a time of war has huge respect, or anyone that serves, period, because you're not deciding what global politics are. But you are signing up to say, hey, I'm willing to protect others. I don't want anything dangerous happening to my family, so send me to defend them. And it's very much a luck, chance, circumstance. I know some great war fighters, some of the most dangerous dudes on the planet. They're highly trained, recon scout snipers, and have done all the schools and shooting packages. And then they go on deployment and they just either never get contact or never get any engagements. And then I see people that are just kind of like, bottom of the totem pole. It doesn't matter what your MOS is. They get on deployment, and it's a highly kinetic deployment. So it doesn't matter what your MOS is, what your job is, as long as someone has the courage to sign up. I think that takes a lot, because you never know. It's like I was saying, it's luck, chance, circumstance, and sometimes that luck is bad luck.
Yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
Sorry about that. Well, Apollo, we've known each other for a little bit, right? It's
Yeah.
important that somebody that comes from the community, as we know, we both share the community, respect the ethos, to understand. A lot of people have lost the sense of direction and concept of 9/11, especially the Battle of Fallujah. I got a couple of guys, and we know everybody that's significant. That kind of changes the mindset when you leave that kind of conflict and come back in the state, because you see the world from a different perspective. You mentioned grit as well, right? And now, as a tier level guy from the community, you know that you're able to re-emphasize your character, your standards, and everything else. But the biggest thing that we're here today to re-emphasize is that you're taking yourself to another level where a lot of guys have qualified in special operations, things like that, and they've able. Some of them haven't really reinvented themselves to a point, and you would agree, right? But at the point you're taking a leadership role for a public servant for the state of Texas, and coming from the state of Texas, I really commend on what you're doing. Going back to you, Jeffrey.
No, I was just going to say some of the same things. Apollo, what did you learn from the Marine Corps that you carry with you today? Because I always tell people this fact. A lot of folks don't give the Marines a lot of credit. We don't have the biggest marketing budget, right? We always do more with less. but it was Secretary Ray Mavis. I'll never forget when he said, out of the Fortune 500 CEOs, 150 and then were Marines, and most of them were on the enlisted side, right? We drained and drilled leadership from day one, from a private all the way to a 4-star. Right. And so I think it's really important for folks I want to hit on that, because I think the Marine Corps gives you that ability mentally to be able to go and take a city or take a country, if you will. But it also gives you business skills that you can translate, right? Keeping the troops informed, JJ did Tabuco, that thing. Well, I'll never forget that freaking leadership acronym. But how have you used that? Because a lot of vets that may be transitioning or maybe getting ready to get out, or maybe those have already gotten out and they're maybe mid-level and they want to get to the next level. How did you use what the Marine Corps equipped you with, Apollo, into the civilian sector?
And don't get me wrong, all branches are great at instilling leadership, but I think the Marine Corps specifically does the biggest pivot, because I'm just gonna be honest. For the Marine Corps, they brainwash us. Instant obedience to command. We're the machine that we'll sit there and think and wait for orders. But then when you say, hey, go get this done, we're gonna get it done. But once someone becomes like an NCO, and even as a lance corporal or a lower ranking person, initiative takes a big factor. And you see it. You see it when you're out in the field and out in training. If a leader's not around, you still got to get things done. And the Marine Corps is really good at small unit tactics and having that initiative-based tactics where, if you see something needs to get done, you don't just wait around. You go and do it because it's got to get done. And you've got that mission and mindset to accomplish the mission. And that translates directly to the civilian world. I've been very fortunate where, I do see a lot of my peers, they get out of the military and they're like, you know what? I can grow a beard. I can not PT. I can, kind of do whatever I want. And it's because they've been running at such a high tempo for so long. They're like, all right, I want to stop. But just like anyone that's done like long distance running, if you're running a marathon and you kind of like, okay, I've run for like 21 miles. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to walk this little bit. It's really hard to start back up again. It's just the way the body works. So it's difficult. And I think a lot of veterans do that as they get out. They start to walk and then it just spirals out of control and they fall apart. And a lot of it's because you'll see veterans kind of, I can drink all day or do whatever it is. And that's not for all veterans, but there is that piece. And, we see that when it comes to the mental side. But for the business aspect, there's a lot of us that we get out and we're like, well, I kind of want to keep running. I want to keep jogging and do things and move on to that next objective. And I think that's a key part. Like you get out, you have a task, you set a mission for yourself, and then you go and accomplish that mission. For me, my intent after getting out of the military was to get a degree and then go back to the original plan and go back to the military. So I got out, while I was in undergrad, I had full intent to go back to the military, back to the Marine Corps. But then, as I was nearing graduation, I was like, well, you know what? Because of the background I had, I was being kind of recruited to work overseas as a contractor. I told myself I'm going to do it for 1 year as a contractor. Well, 1 year turned into like 6. And then I got kind of old and broken and kind of out of shape. It is a young man's game for the most part, the military. So I pivoted. And that's the big thing. The military gives you that kind of courage to be able to like, you know what, I can pivot. I can make a decision and get things done, because the military is chaos. It's very much chaos. Even, in World War II, I think it was like a German general was like, we don't know what the Americans are doing because they're crazy. They have no structure. I don't know the exact same, but it's something to that effect. And it is, there's so much craziness going on, but Americans and the American military has this mindset of like, hey, we got to get this done. We're going to do it. If we got to, get supplies, we'll figure it out. And that's the big thing. Having the initiative and the courage to jump into something that you just don't know. It's pretty strong. That's why, I do think veterans and Marines specifically, or any kind of special operations kind of type folks do so well in organizations like startups. And I know, Jeffrey, you were talking about having your own startup. We're built for that because we are used to chaos and things going on, and we can make decisions really, really fast because we're used to the tempo of these decisions being life or death. When, you're making a business decision, yeah, you might lose some money, you might do something bad, but you're not going to die. And, there's always a risk and reward piece to business. And just the civilian world itself, there's, if you're not taking risk, you're going to end up stagnant, and then you end up getting surpassed. The SAS, the British SAS, which is like the premier unit that everything is modeled after. Their models, who dares wins. And that's true. You have to be willing to take a chance on yourself and put yourself in a situation where, you're going to get tested. And military folks have the mindset of like, you know what, we're just going to get it done. We're going to continue on. So it doesn't matter what job you did. Like you could be, I'm a grunt, so I'm going to say it. You could be a super pogue, you could be an admin person, but you have that mindset of like, I'm used to chaos of things just pivoting. Or, in the Marine Corps, everyone's a rifleman. They might say, hey, you're going to go stand this post, but it's not the job you signed up for, but you're going to get it done. And regardless, you'll accomplish that task because someone has either pointed you in the right direction to do it. But then there's a certain point where, especially in the military, where you hit that little wall of like, hey, we just got to accomplish the mission. It doesn't matter what your job is, what your MOS is, we're going to get it done. And that's a huge part of being successful post-military, I think, as well as, in the military. So it's people that have the initiative to get it done.
So to your point there, Paulo, that's a very good narrative. Right? So everything you've explained is pretty much what you've learned through transition. But the biggest thing that we're here today to move forward is what is your biggest why moving into public office? What do the viewers need to know? That, you're coming from Texas, from a small town that I'm familiar with, and I don't even live out there. Yeah. I know the culture. And in Texas is a very patriotic state. They stick to the Second Amendment rights. They're very pro-veteran. We've talked offline. Let the viewers know why you're doing this and why it's important that veterans like yourself are running for public office, if you don't mind.
So absolutely. One of the biggest reasons, and I think anyone that's deployed has seen those signs as you're leaving a base in Iraq and Afghanistan that says complacency kills. And that's to remind you that, you can't get complacent because you could die. And when it comes to politics, I think the same thing kind of applies. People get into office and they're phenomenal in the very beginning. But then if they're there for too long, they get complacent. And that's what I've been seeing, here in Texas, here in my district. I'm running against a guy, an incumbent, that he's been in office for well over a decade. And I'm not a fan of that. And as I've been going across the district, I've been talking to folks, and they all kind of say the same thing. Like, oh, he was phenomenal in the very beginning. He did pass some great legislation in Texas, constitutional carry, which I think is great and important. But then, he's kind of riding that wave. He still talks about that today. He's like, my first term, he didn't say my first term, but he's like, I passed constitutional carry. That happened on his first term. We need someone that's fresh. We need to have someone that's willing to, put in the work because complacency kills. So there's that aspect. I don't think anyone should be in the same seat for over a decade. And then there's also other things in Texas that are going on. I'm sure it's going on throughout all of America, but our property taxes here in Texas are extremely high and they keep on raising. We need to slow that down. And also, I'm a big Reagan guy. I know Reagan came from California, but he always said that government is not the answer. Reagan, Ron Paul, that's kind of my thought process. Government is never the answer. It typically creates more problems. So even the Republican Party in Texas is taking kind of a top-down approach, like where they're over legislating, and I'm not a fan of that. We need to reduce regulations, reduce things that are going to impede things and make things more expensive. And then also, when this legislation's written, it always benefits the big cities, but these small rural counties, they're struggling. They're struggling to keep up with this legislation that works well for a well-populated county that has these big cities in them, but for these rural counties that don't have much already to maintain all these things that the state is saying that they need to maintain, they just can't do it. And the only way that they can do this is by raising taxes, and it's driving people out of Texas. I see it all the time. I see people that are like, oh yeah, we love it here, but it's just too expensive, and they're moving away from the cities into rural spots, or moving out of the state, which is just crazy. Even the street that I live on, 2021, COVID area time frame, the housing market was just crazy here, and everybody was cashing out and moving out of state, and I just don't like seeing that stuff. I want people to be able to stay in the communities that they built. Texas should be the best place to live, best place to work, and best place to raise a family, and I'm seeing that go away, and I'm not a fan of that.
So I have a buddy of mine. He's a COO for a film startup in Texas. I'm going to connect with him because his CEO said something similar to that effect. But it wasn't until the pandemic for me where it was really eye-opening, because I got small business owners in my family, right? One has a restaurant, the other one has a construction business. And I just saw the challenges they had to go through not being able to operate right away because they weren't some big old corporation who got to stay open. That was eye-opening for me, because I'm like, okay, that's my family. If they lose their business, where are they going to go? Like, they're going to have to go back to school. They're going to have to pivot. But for me, it was really eye-opening, because I think small businesses are the backbone of America. We keep saying it all the time, but we need to give them more opportunities, because one of the things you mentioned, we need more innovation. Let's get more competition into the marketplace and let people actually compete, right? I think it was a veteran who was testifying before the Small Business Senate Committee talking about building data centers, right, in Texas or in America, so we can compete with countries that are our adversaries, like China. So I completely agree with you, Apollo. I think it's very key that we drive also affordability, and I think that's something you're probably gonna hit on a little bit. But I think for a small business, if they had a more business-friendly climate, like California is not that business-friendly from what I have uncovered, but if we had more business-friendly policy, more small businesses, especially veteran-owned businesses. I think veterans are super innovative. I mean, you give a Marine downtime, watch what happens, right? They're going to do some really innovative and interesting things. But I want you to kind of hit about how, especially with your cybersecurity tech business leader background, why is it important for what you're doing maybe in Texas, in your community, to bring more innovation, to bring more technology, and to give people opportunities to have skin in the game?
Yeah. So in Texas, one of the things that a lot of people are talking about are data centers. There are a lot of data centers, and you mentioned this is a national security issue. We need more to be competitive, but we need them in the right places. And another thing that we've done here in Texas is that we've put up barriers for local government to be able to negotiate with these data centers. So they're coming into these negotiations with their hands tied behind their back, and we need to undo that. These data centers, they're super important, and we need them. They provide some jobs that are super important, and they're typically high-paying jobs, especially on the construction side. For the construction aspect, they come in, and there's a ton of jobs that come in for this stuff to build these data centers. And then once they're operating, then it's like, depending on the size, 50 to 60. It just depends on the size of the data center. But we need to give the local governments the ability to negotiate and to be like, hey, yeah, we want this data center or we don't. We're seeing a lot of counties where, and they actually were told by the state Senate, like, hey, you can't put a moratorium, which is the ability to research and take a pause on the building of a data center, because they were like, you're going to get sued. And that should never be there. I'm not a fan of top-down legislation, just like in the Marine Corps. It's that small unit leader, that NCO, that corporal or sergeant that kind of gets things done. The government in Texas has gotten rid of the ability for corporals and sergeants to take charge of, to have control over what they're going to do. And we need to do that. We need to give local government the ability to have those negotiations so they can get things done. And it depends on the county. Like you see other counties where they're like, we want all the data centers. We don't have issues. We don't have concerns about water. We already have the infrastructure set up. But then you'll see some other counties that are like, hey, we don't want this because we don't have the infrastructure to support it. So we should give it back to local government. That's my thing. The more local, the better. County commissioners, county judges need to have the ability to, have that negotiation. They have that negotiation power because now they're trying to do it with their hands tied behind their back. And there are these abatements, which is like basically saying, hey, you don't have this organization isn't going to have to pay taxes, which is very business friendly, but it's not beneficial for these rural counties because they have to end up supporting, this $1 billion company. It just shouldn't happen that way.
I agree. Yeah, I agree with you. It's definitely something like a startup, right? You want to make sure that startup is well capitalized enough so they can scale at a healthy way, right? Small towns are not going to be able to do that. I had another Marine who has he was a mayor of a small town in rural Louisiana. I think they had like 5,000 people, and he had to find a way to fight them just to get like some website up and running.
Yeah.
So they can't bring the big old Amazons of the world to bring them there. It's not sustainable and it's not scalable. But you hit on one really important thing as well. I always tell people where we are in a very global competitive race right now with the world, where you're seeing other countries build what you mentioned, digital first infrastructures. Some of them don't have to wait or have these legacy infrastructures that are built like our roads or like our technology. They can just go digital native first. And so that's how they can leapfrog us. You see that in fintech with Brazil, or this whole BRICS initiative that you're probably hearing about. And so the data centers or the infrastructure, we need more infrastructure in America. I don't want to be hearing about the president of El Salvador calling California out because we can't build our high-speed rail fast enough. He's like, I could have built that within like a year. You guys have been going on for like 20 years, hundreds of billions of dollars later, and you can't build a high-speed rail. Like, what is going on with that? But then, going back to the whole competition in the marketplace here. So what would you do if, because we want to make sure that this is happening. By the way, you guys, if you guys see this ticker down there, apollo4texas.com, you'll learn a little more about him. But what would you do on your first day in office, Apollo? What would be some of your priorities? Or as you mentioned, one of your the incumbents, he was able to pass some legislation. Right? What would you do on day one?
The biggest thing, and if I do get elected, I want to be talking to teachers, to educators, to parents, to everyone, so we can have a game plan that includes the people. That's the other big thing that I think isn't happening now. People are, they serve special interests and lobbies. I don't like that. I haven't really accepted, or I haven't, I've been self-funding for the most part, whereas my opponent has spent like $6 million on this race already. He's outspent me by like 40x. And it's because he's been in office for so long that it's just accrued and snowballed. The biggest thing, day one, we need to fund our education. Now, currently in Texas, the way that it's done, it's kind of an attendance-based model. And we just passed legislation for a voucher system, which I'm a big fan of school choice. Like, people should be able to send their kids wherever it is they want. Like, if they want to send their kids to a Christian school, cool, they should be able to do that. But the way that the legislation is written now is because our public schools are funded by attendance. If a kid sends their kid to homeschool or to another private school, it's taking money away from the public schools. And that's something we should never do. We're already on the bottom half of ranking, and to take more money away from public schools is a horrible idea, because the only way that counties can pay for things is raising property taxes. And even then, Like I was talking to a school board person in a small rural city that they're already losing 200K worth for next year because students are going to other schools. Cool. But for these small rural counties, 200K is a lot of money. For a big county like the city that I live in, Georgetown, Texas, we're in Williamson County. We've got the money. We've got, it's great here. Everybody's like, oh yeah, the school voucher choice, school choice is great. We should do school choice plus funding our schools. They're state institutions, just like, our sheriff's office and things like that, which those also need more funding. And the crazy part is we have the money to do it. We just don't fund them. And that's something that we absolutely need to fix here in Texas. It'll make just the outcomes better for our children. And it also makes it to where like that school board ISC that, or school board member that I was talking to, he was like, the only way that we can recover, 200K is by cutting things. And most likely, he didn't say this directly, but that typically means that you're going to have to get rid of teachers. That's another thing we shouldn't do. We're already struggling to get teachers as it is. We need people that are going to be in there. Now, don't get me wrong. We do need to have transparency on how that money is spent. So that's another piece of legislation that I'd want. Transparency on how schools spend money so we know that it's effective. And then we can cut out all the extra stuff when we can focus on brilliance and the basics. In Recon or any other kind of elite type unit, it's not that they're better. They've just mastered brilliance in the basics. And that's what we need to focus on: reading, math, English, science, technology, even like things like that would be super beneficial. So education would be super important. And the way that if we funded our education a little bit more, that also helps reduce the property taxes, because when property taxes are raised in Texas, it's done by the counties. The thing that most counties spend most of their money on are funding the schools. So if we took a lot of that burden away from the counties and the appraisal districts, that would just be a game changer. So figuring out how we can fund our schools better, because right now it's only about 34% across the board of Texas public school education is funded from the state. The rest, most of it is from property taxes and local counties. And then there's like less than 15% is funded by the federal, government, which comes in and says, hey, we have these grants, we're going to give you this money. We need to figure out how to fund it better from Texas. I don't want to depend on the federal government to fund our schools.
Yes. One of the things, and you mentioned faith, in the word, it talks about, my people will perish for lack of knowledge. My sister is an educator in Fresno, for West Fresno. And she tells me every day about the challenges trying to get kids more tech literate.
Yep.
And it's very important that we're able to actually give kids, like you mentioned in the Marine Corps, right? We have the whole Marine concept. You're not just good at shooting, but you're good at your job. You're good at your physical fitness. We also, I think we should encourage that to the children and give them biblical knowledge, give them wisdom, but also make them more competitive in this global economy that we're now entering, where you can just work from home from a computer. You don't even have to go into an office. But I do think, to your point too, you should get to know your neighbors and have conversations with them and build community and build fellowship, so you can get to know them, and you can find out we'd be more diplomatic.
Yeah.
Instead of always going kinetic first is one of our business models here in America. We always want to go very kinetic, based on what I heard about today on the news, and I try to stay away from it as much as possible. But it's one of those. I think, Apollo. I think you're hitting on the right thing, because what I don't want to happen, and Jaime and I talk about this quite a bit, is I don't want more of our skill sets being offshored to a country that ends up becoming our adversary, right? Which we might see that in IT.
We do.
Why don't we build more local IT opportunities? Why don't we get more veterans plugged in? Why don't we have more American innovation policies that put Americans first? That's what I want to see, Apollo.
I agree 100%. When it comes to the data centers that I was talking about, a lot of the times, they talk about like, oh, they're going to bring you know, 5,000 jobs. Most of those jobs are for the building of the data center. Once that building's done, it's those people kind of leave. Of course, though, we're going to have contractors that come in to fix things and maintain things, but the actual operation is going to be about, 50 to 60. Just again, as I mentioned before, it depends on the people, and a lot of those are outsourced. They're going to outsource to people from India or other countries, which works, but we need to focus on America first. Educate the people, train the people how to do the job in the local areas. And if we gave the ability for local counties in Texas and county judges and county commissioners in Texas, the way that our organizational structure is, if we gave them the ability to negotiate, they could negotiate that, saying, hey, you can only hire, or you have to hire this many people from the local community, things like that. That would be a huge first step in getting things fixed. But yeah, we're falling behind slowly but surely. And you mentioned faith and things like that. We need that. We need people to step up and be involved in everyone's individual families. We do have the First Amendment. People can practice whatever religion they want and say what they want, but we need to at least teach, like when we were kids, teach right and wrong, teach civics, teach, government, give people an understanding of what's going on in the world. And then also financial literacy. We see a lot of kids now that, and same for me, like I've been very fortunate to have studied things on my own to where, I'm saving for retirement. I'm making sure I have a plan. And I talk to my peers, and a lot of them they're not saving because they don't realize that they need to do that for their futures. And we need to teach financial literacy. Or, I work in tech, so I've been very fortunate and have, a great paying job, but I live well within my means. And I see some of my counterparts or just other friends that are, in tech, and they live great. And it's like, okay, that's awesome. I want everyone to, be happy and to do what they want, but we need to teach like just that financial literacy of like, hey, make smart decisions, be smart with your money. And that needs to go down to everybody. So, people that don't have, really high paying jobs can still have a great retirement and can stop working and actually retire. We don't teach those fundamental things anymore.
Yeah, hey, I'm gonna say it to everybody, but it sounds like Math for Marines is paying off. I mean, the Marine Corps is the only branch that has been able to pass an audit. So
yeah,
I'm just saying, but I do agree with you. It's very important for folks to have a strategic plan for your life. And these companies, corporations, as you know, they got their own vision, mission statements. They got their own corporate principles. They got their own charters. They got their own contracts. But you also got to think about having your own contracts, and personal development. I think is going to be key. So let's hit a little bit about what is on your nightstand. What are you reading today that is getting you a little more smarter?
So. Right now, me and my wife, we do like a little Bible study where we're reading the Bible, which I'm going to be honest, I've never read it from end to end before. So we're reading the Bible. And then there's a book, I think her name's Joan, a book called The Bible Recap. So I don't know if you've ever read the Bible. It's hard. It's very hard to understand, especially the Old Testament. So the Bible Recap, it helps break it down for you Barney style, which makes it a little bit more digestible, because there are times where, the way the Bible was written, some of it was written for the time of, when those people were around, and the way that they storytell is they name all these names, and it's really easy to zone out where you're just reading words. But this breaks it down into a small daily, reading. And it's one of those books that we're going to have to read forever. You just constantly are learning new things, and we're learning new things. So yeah, it's great. So that's basically all we've been reading lately. I used to be a big audiobook guy, as we're driving around. But now, now we're mostly focused on the Bible. That's the one thing that we want to learn. And then the Bible recap, which is you read it with the Bible as you're going through it. So every night, basically 2 chapters a night for the most part that me and my wife will do, which has been great. And I think it's important to learn that stuff.
Thank you for mentioning that, and amen to that. It's the only book in the world that does not go obsolete. It's one of the most powerful leadership manuals that you'll ever learn. And I actually read it for the first time in 2020 when I restored my relationship with God and with Jesus Christ again. And so, but I want people to take away that is a leadership manual. There's a lot of principles that were you're in tech, so you're probably familiar with worldwide technology. It was founded by the wealthiest African American in America, and he has no tech background. I was actually in one of his offices for a veteran event last year. I'm actually reading one of his books called Doing Business by the Good Book, right? It's a $20 billion IT government company that he has established. And he gets a lot of his business acumen from the Word. Other companies that come to mind, In-N-Out, that's another faith-based.
Yeah.
So by the way, I don't know if you guys have In-N-Out in Texas yet. I think you guys do.
We do now, thankfully.
But, they're a private company, and they hide their scripture within their cups. Or, Chick-fil-A, Hobby Lobby, on and on. I can name quite a bit of them. But they have based their corporate vision and mission on the Word is why important. It's why, Nayib Bukele, when he was on Tucker Carlson's interview, was saying, Tucker was like, whoa, hold on. Why is your economic plan based on loving God first? And he's like, why not? And look what happened. They cleaned up the crime that was happening. So I encourage a lot of folks to get more into the Word, because we need that. We need more men of God. We need more women of God. We need people to have more wisdom, because that is profitable. It's why Solomon asked for it first and not riches, and then God gave him the wealth after that, because if he's going to give you all this responsibility, Apollo, he needs to make sure that you're going to make wise decisions. So you're definitely on the right track, and if you want to join us for fellowship, happy to have you for that. As we get ready to kind of get to the last segment here, I do want to get one important thing off. Is your team playing in March Madness at UT, or I don't know, you're at Aggie UT, you go back and forth, huh?
So I do. I like them both, and I'm not gonna lie, I am not a basketball person. Yeah, for me it's college football all day, every day, and I support both teams. I support the University of Texas Hook'em Horns as well as Texas A&M. I went to both schools. So yeah, they're both phenomenal schools. But yeah, college football is my jam. That's
okay. All right, I'm a USC fan, Trojan fan. We haven't had our glory days. It's been a while since we had our glory days, but I'm definitely a Duke fan when it comes to basketball. I want to kind of, this last piece is, I want you to kind of talk to my veterans here, of those who may have gone through some challenges, because one of the things we also want to get more vets plugged into a new mission like what you have, so they don't have to get go down dark paths or be consumed in complacency as you mentioned before, but talk about how important it is for a veteran to use their benefits, or how important it is for a veteran to find a new mission.
100%. I see so many veterans that, when we get out, it's not like the Vietnam War. GWAT, we've been afforded, we have all these benefits that were laid on the backs of men that went before us. So what we should do to honor them, to honor the Vietnam veterans, the World War II, the Korea veterans, is take advantage of them and be successful. So especially the GI Bill, I'm a big fan of, there's no cookie cutter method for an individual to be successful. I don't think you necessarily need school, but it is helpful to an extent, at least depending on the path that you want to take. But have a game plan and take advantage of that stuff. You've earned it. People signed up. It doesn't matter what branch you're in, Air Force, Coast Guard, people sign up. There's always that risk of something happening where, you could get hurt, you could die. You're basically writing a blank check, and part of that is that we're going to get rewards. The GI Bill specifically, take advantage of that. I went to undergrad, which was free at the University of Texas. Texas also has this thing called the Hazelwood Act. So I was also able to go to business school, also free, because I was a Texas resident when I signed up out of Texas, and then went to Texas A&M Law, which was also free. I did get a scholarship towards the end that, it was, besides paying like fees and things, all of that was laid out for me. And it was minus the work and the time, and you still have to earn your way in. But anyone can do it. And I'll tell people, like, I was a pretty decent student, but not the best. And I knew that when I got out of the military, I knew that, going straight to a university might not be the best fit. I went to a community college for a year, did that, and then transferred to the University of Texas, which is one of the, best institutions in Texas and the US, I would say, and did well. And then the business school that I went to, I was a pretty decent student for undergrad. The University of Texas for business, I think they're ranked it was 18 when I went, and now they're 16. It's one of the best business schools in America. And I think having that story of someone that was willing to serve and willing to, risk it all for the sake of the United States or Texas or, whatever your reasons for joining are, that's a compelling story. And they know that veterans are going to be people that are mission orientated. And a lot of the times that's what it takes to be successful in business. So, you don't shoot yourself short. I kind of always think oh yeah. I love that I went to Texas. It's a highly academic school, but there's part of me that's maybe I should have gone to Stanford or MIT. I just kind of stayed local. Open your perspective, have that mission and work towards it. That's all it is. It's doing the work. Even if you're a transfer student or whatever it is, do the work so you can set yourself up, to have the outcomes that you want. And don't just, I would highly recommend not just being oh, okay, now I can, grow my hair out, grow my beard out, and do all that stuff. The only time I ever had a beard was when I was in Afghanistan working. But if you think you can kind of not be a bum, but just kind of let go, we're still working in the private sector. So appearance is a little bit of it. You can't, this is one thing that was hard for me to transition, the military life, and especially, cool guy units. It's a pretty meat eater culture where, you're cussing all the time. And it was really hard for me to stop cussing and things like that. But those little small things that are easy to fix, with a little bit of work and a little bit of, thinking about it, it's just more acceptable into the regular world, because most of the United States are not veterans. They're not, especially not combat veterans. So when you're coming in talking about oh yeah, I, did XYZ and I, effing did that and effing did this. And that used to be for me, every other word was effing. And that's just not how civilians talk. So I highly recommend just kind of, fitting in. The Apostle Paul. And I don't want to push religion on anyone, but the Apostle Paul was very big on going into other cultures and, kind of fitting in, doing not breaking their culture, fitting in and then evangelizing. And, he seeded a bunch of churches and things like that because of that. So, get along with folks, and have a goal. Having a goal, having a mission is super important. And be able to pivot. Just because you go through a little bit of, and we're veterans, we all go through adversity. But just because you go through a little adversity, don't just stop or get upset, and don't blame other folks. Just pivot. Just like in business, you got to be able to pivot to be able to change and innovate and get things done. So don't get stuck in the whole hey, this went wrong, I'm done. Be able to pivot. And then also don't be afraid to fail, and don't wait. You have all these benefits. Take the initiative now. If you wait around and are oh, well, I don't have enough saved up, or, I haven't done XYZ, you're just never going to get things done because there's always something to wait for. Just like the military, you don't always wait to, get things done. It's, speed, intensity, and violence of action. You gotta move with a purpose. Now I'm not saying rush in, think things through thoroughly, but don't just kind of put everything on the back burner. Like, oh, I'm gonna run for office in another year. That was my thing. Like running for office, I had been planning it and was going to do it. My wife had to have a pretty major surgery. So I put it on hold. I was like, I'm not going to do it this cycle because, she had a surgery or she had brain surgery. She's fine. She's healthy. But then she right before the filing deadline, she was like, yeah, you should do it. And I thought about it like, I don't have anything prepared. All the infrastructure that I would have had, isn't there. But I thought to myself, why wait? There's something I don't like. There's things that I want to change and that I think I'd do better. So I'm just going to put my name in the hat and name on the ballot and, make it happen. So, I'm not naive. Most likely the guy's spent, 40x more than me and has that name recognition. I'm most likely, potentially going to lose, but I'm still going to give it a solid try. And I think that's what you need to do to be successful. You got to start somewhere.
Paulo, I love a lot of things you talked about. Walking by faith is very important. And, like I said, we're here to support you. And I hope, I can see you over there in Texas or vice versa in California, the fifth biggest economy in the world as a standalone. So just have to share that. But I appreciate you coming on. And just know that we're here to support you in anything that you need. Any final thoughts from you?
Thank you for having me. Definitely, guys. Well, if you live in Texas, Senate District 5, vote for me. But also, just like I said before, don't wait to get things done. Do them yourself. You've got a bunch of support. Veterans support veterans. We help each other out and talk to people. Don't be afraid to reach out. I'm on LinkedIn. Reach out, ask me questions if you want. Whether it's policy stances or just business stances or whatever it is, reach out to the community. We all can't do this alone. A lot of people try and it's difficult. Everything in life is a team sport for the most part. So reach out to your team. Veterans, I see it as we're all a team. We all work together. We all support each other. And we all call each other out as well. And sometimes you need that. You need to hear like, hey, what you're doing here is not going to work. And also I've had a lot of people like, especially non-veterans, like for the politics side, a lot of like political insiders tell me, you shouldn't do it. Your opponent's got too much money. He hasn't been primaried in a long time. Don't wait. Don't take all that advice. Those are the people that, don't do anything for themselves. So take initiative, sign up, get things done. That's what you did in the military, and that's what you can do in, your civilian life. Amen,
brother. And just one more thing for everyone here. David didn't have all the resources, but he was able still to kill the Goliath with one shot, one kill. So 100%. As long as you got that faith. So Paulo, thank you for joining us. I'm sure we're going to have you on many more times, brother.
Hopefully.
Veterans
Awesome.
Club
Appreciate
signing
it.
out. Thank you, brother.
Bye.